Welp, the first week of a new Overwatch League season is in the history books. In some aspects, a lot went down, and in others, well, not that much happened. Regardless, it was a pretty enjoyable opening week with lots of lessons and takeaways to be had. Something that we like to do over on this channel is go over some of these things, talk about some of those mental notes we made, what caught our interest, what happened with things like the meta, teams, production, and our overall thoughts. We've been doing it for years here, so we're bringing it back once again for the people. So today I present to you what I learned about Overwatch League Season 6 opening week. And where I actually wanted to start this go around is what we noticed right off the rip. The production quality. This is something we have to highlight, as I'd argue it's the best it's been in years, if not ever. The desk they have now is incredibly clean, it's very professional, and it reminds me heavily of the old days of Overwatch League. All the little features they have going on has made it a major step up that grabs your attention. The design is sleek. The segments and graphics are much improved, and for me it's the little things that really make a difference. And it just so happens the league had lots of them. The replay screen, where Jake and Rainforest can draw and point things out to the audience, really helps out on the analysis end. It's professional and it gives off heavy sports vibes. Another enjoyable feature was the whole Employee of the Month segment. It was creative and a great way to show off the league's talent for various reasons that could go beyond their actual gameplay. Another thing that really caught my eye is the simple and yet very detailed player cards, showing things like position, what team they played for last, when they joined their new one, signature heroes, and even if they've won a role star or some sort of other award before. It's super neat. And let's give a round of applause to Jake for being a seamless fit on the desk. Just having a guy that's played and coached professionally for years brings some excellent insight that we've never really had before. No offense, Custa. Jake points out a lot of details that generally make the desk more exciting for specific segments. The desk has been a weak spot in the past, and I'd say it's much improved, so production definitely gets a massive thumbs up. From there we can talk about the actual gameplay, and a good starting point is always the meta. This year the meta has been very diverse at the start, much like the last few years, but this year may be the most diverse yet. They seem pretty confused on what they want to play, and I think it's a good thing, not only for the game, but for the esports scene as well. A problem many viewers with Overwatch esports have had throughout the years is there's just too much of the same compositions and those non-stop mirror matches. By making the meta more diverse, you're essentially killing two birds with one stone. A lot of maps feel very fresh depending on the team. Seeing those slight variations or two totally different comps altogether hits different. It's a lot more compelling to have so many different styles, especially when some teams take it a step further. Correct me if I'm wrong in the comment section, but I believe that Roadhog, Orisa, and Junkrat were the only heroes to not get played a single time. That is really good for the health of the league, and we can only hope it stays this way for more than 1 week. When there's no straight up definitive meta, things get chaotic, leading to some more interesting results in more ways than one. The gameplay is less refined than you'd expect with a definitive meta where you can perfect your craft, but most people prefer it this way. In terms of the actual compositions themselves, there was a typical norm that was played a bit more than everything else, that being Winston Tracer, Brig Ana, then either a Hanzo or a Sombra. But teams were definitely not afraid to stray away, which was what made things so entertaining. There were plenty of variations of this one comp alone to start, and people did look beyond this comp altogether. We had some viable picks for a lot of different map types. Like on Control, for example. Rush compositions utilizing either a Rhine or Ramatra, plus Baptiste, Lucio, and Mei were great for those enclosed areas and Control maps. For the more wide open areas like Escort maps, we saw a lot more Sigma get involved. Other moments even saw Zarya and Junker Queen. Their success of course varied by the team, but it was cool to see two of the weaker tanks in recent memory get some quality love, and the fact that we saw things like Soldier 76, Torb, and Reaper accompany them made it all the more exciting. And hey, we actually got to see Lifeweaver. I mean, who would have thought? That character is so terrible and one of the worst new characters ever made on release, and it's mostly in thanks to the Vegas Eternal. Because they were so bad, teams could actually get away with running him and find mild success with some pretty cool moments. Take Florida's window on the pedal platform, or maneuvering to high ground, for example. He's not a good hero at all, like in the slightest, but it's cool that we got to see his utility at this level get such fun uses. There was a lot of variation, which means that teams can do a lot of counterplay, or they can run their comfort picks. That's what you want. Now, of course, I'm not expecting this type of stuff to last. It usually doesn't, but for right now, things do feel a bit more wide open than usual, so perhaps there will be a couple of different compositions that will be useful for the time being. Now, how that changes as teams get more used to their surroundings and when balance patches come in, I'm not too sure, but for now, I'm going to enjoy the ride, as this was a great meta. Next, I'd like to highlight teams and players that stood out. So to start, the way too early top dogs are definitely Reign, Outlaws, and Mayhem for what it's worth. It's only been 1 week, but they look like they're the strongest and most complete right now. Reign and Outlaws in particular each had a unique challenge this week, that being Shock and Gladiators respectively, and they beat their opponents with relative ease. Lip was crazy, Merit was crazy, and so was Shu, amongst others. And big shout out to the Florida Mayhem for playing that Life Weaver for an entire series, let alone one map. Actually so sick. Going beyond the top teams, there were some teams that got a lot of talk from the community. I mean, there were a few in particular where during my co-stream, I get the question over and over and over again from lots of chatters joining the chat, and one has to be the San Francisco Shock. They have been the talk of the town, but this is nothing new. It's been like this for years ever since they established their dominance in this league. The Shock had reasonably high expectations coming into this year, and their first week was unfortunately a bit disappointing, and some people are getting carried away saying they're overrated, there's no way they're going to be a top 3 or 4 team or whatever it is, and I just think it's ridiculous. They've only gotten to America recently, and apparently have not been practicing all that much, so we should probably give them some time before we start freaking out. This is such a typical thing where this community overreacts, so I'm not going to budge on the Shock until we see a bit more gameplay. We literally go through this every single year. Give them like a few weeks, maybe a month before you start to judge. They still showed flashes under some tough circumstances. Just to run through a few more things real quick, I'd say the Washington Justice were off to a good start this week, with a lot of promise coming out of DPS and Teru, and it was also interesting to see Mirror get a lot more playtime than Benbest, because that is not what we saw in the Pro-Am, but considering the meta and how wide open it is, it kind of makes sense as Mirror is the more flexible player. The Justice feel like a really interesting team that with time can gain confidence and become a dark horse, but they haven't really played anyone significant yet, so we'll have to see what challenges come their way in the future weeks and how they respond. Another Western team that was very much in the headlines this week was the Boston Uprising, with 2 decisive wins to show that maybe the rumors about them being boomed were a little exaggerated. Takei in particular played some excellent Overwatch all weekend. He's playing with a lot of champions, and there's a lot of pressure on him, and he wants to prove himself to those guys and show that he can be reliable. Although, just like Justice, we definitely have to wait for Boston to play a better opponent first before we judge where they're actually at. It's good to see them playing well for now, though. Looking out to the Eastern Conference, I'd say the Charge and the Spark were definitely the standout teams from a positive aspect. The Spark showed us a lot of potential with their awesome 1-2 punch at DPS to get the fans excited. And the Charge got an impressive win over the Dallas Field to put some serious respect on their names. When Jimmy and Choi can play like that and just do their thing, the Charge are scary. They are definitely a dark horse to look out for if they can play with this kind of confidence, as a lot of teams in the East are around their ceiling. So there's a chance the Charge could really surprise myself and a lot of other people this year. Over on the more interesting / disappointing, I guess you could say, side of things is definitely the Fuel and the Dragons. The Dragons proved to be a big talking point this weekend for the obvious reason that Fleda's playing tank. It's still early, but I'd say his gameplay had some ups and downs in his first debut. On the more mechanically demanding heroes like Sigma, there were some good plays, but on Winston, there's maybe a bit more proving to do, and Gushue is not the best opponent to do so against, so I'd like to see how him and the Dragons do against someone a bit more manageable. Keeping an eye on how he and the Dragons progress throughout this year should be a very interesting storyline. Then with the Dallas Field, they just started off disappointing, getting swept by the Charge like that, coming off of your championship victory, you move to Korea and it's all exciting. It's kind of sad and not the greatest look for them, but I do think in this aspect as well, thought people may be overreacting. Why do I say that? Well, it's because two things. One, Rush-led teams typically start their seasons off slow. Every single year he has been in the league, his team has lost on opening day. Not to mention, the Dallas Fuel have never actually won their opening match before in their entire franchise's history. So when combining those two facts, it's maybe not the most surprising thing in the world to see them lose on opening day. I think the thing that more so has caught people off guard is how uninspirational they looked. To get 3-0'd like that is not a very good sign, and you can tell there were some issues they need to work on. Finding their comfort with Hanbin as the only tank in a really diverse meta like this is not easy. They've got to find a good comfort composition that they can really play and utilize and define the meta with like they did last year and the year before. Also, Dallas just have to adjust to having a weaker support line. They have to learn to play around their strengths rather than what they had with Fielder and Chio. You could tell there was a bit of hesitance from their DPS and Hanbin. Like, they were just scared of something, or maybe they don't trust their new backline enough, and that is something that could come with time. There's reason to be optimistic about them, and reasons to worry as well. They're definitely the biggest team to keep an eye on in the East as we move into the coming weeks. Now for one other team that I briefly wanted to discuss, that being the Vegas Eternal, and how they are pretty obviously the worst team this league has to offer, with even the Valiant looking a lot more lively with a better attitude. It's still early and they can improve, but the vibes have not been changing much since the preseason and the end of last season. They continue to lose and disappoint and not play with any sort of real confidence whatsoever, and one can't help but feel bad for this group. They're definitely trying their best, but it's just not nearly good enough in their current state, and they need more help. They look awful, to the point where teams are straight up running Lifeweaver on them like a BM of sorts. I'd hate to say it, but there's actually a chance they may not take a map for this entire stage. That is the kind of vibe they're giving off. It's awful. I mean, just awful. And I'm praying for some kind of life, because right now it feels like they are not accepting their own identity. The Valiant are, and look what's happening with them. They look more relaxed, they're giving slightly better results with a more favorable outcome, and I'm just hoping that Vegas do the same or get another player very soon. Otherwise, this is going to be a long and dreadful season where they very well may take the title of the worst team of all time. Running down some individuals that I took notice of that had a really great performance that makes me look forward to what's to come include Chio and Lip out of Atlanta. You've got Shu and how Pelican was playing in Houston. Alpha's popping off on Justice. Decay I talked about earlier has been good on Boston. Merit and someone as well on Florida been nasty. On the Shock proper's been looking good as usual. Defiant have Hydron doing his thing. Gladiators not just have Kevster, but Lastra also played like an absolute monster in that Defiant series. Over in the East, I very much enjoyed the way that both Leave and Gushui played on the Spark. Basically everyone on the Charge as well. They were firing on all cylinders, not just Choi and Jimmy. The whole team was popping off. Then with the Dynasty, I liked the way that Prophet and Bellows Rio were looking. On Infernal, I'd say their DPS and Skewed all had nice games in spite of coming up short against their other Soul team. Some of these guys named very well could be in the MVP conversation this year, so it'll be important to look out to see if they continue to play at this level to establish a clear-cut, way too early lead. The last thing I wanted to cover in this video is the competitive nature of opening week. Unfortunately, this week was not the greatest competitively. Most games weren't very close at all, with only 2 matches going to map 5, and most of the time just being 3 Overwatch. Now, luckily for us, both map 5s were absolute gigabangers. Shock vs Defiant was absolutely insane, and Soul vs Soul really came down to the wire. Both games set a precedent for how crazy the spring qualifiers and beyond could be when 2 teams of equal skill play. The only issue is, it's unclear how often we'll get it. Most of the other matches, like I said, weren't close. The only exceptions being, I'd say at least, Titans Mayhem and London Boston. And it helps that some teams probably are set to rebound eventually, but others may not be so lucky. And I especially feel this way about the West. It is a very top-heavy region. There's 6, maybe 7 interesting teams at most. The others might get totally ruined. There's upset potential with a few groups, I'd say, but many teams already feel like their fate is sealed, which is kind of pathetic. It's not very fun, and it makes you dread a lot of games that'll be coming up over the coming weeks. Now, there certainly will be some great peaks that happen. When we do get those occasional top tier pairings in those tournament and playoff matches, it should be fantastic. But what about all of the moments in between? How do we get by? That is what I'm worried about. That is where I fear this season could become very boring, and I truly hope that we either get some drama or some major level ups, otherwise this season will feel quite slow. To conclude my thoughts, Week 1 was enjoyable. There were some good vibes, some notable improvements in quality, and some big-time surprises and points of interest. The meta was also enjoyable, and so were watching various storylines play out, as well as the scrimbucks. Although, in my opinion, this was without a doubt the worst opening week in the league's history. Only a select few of the games were truly interesting, and I'd say that Overwatch 2 no longer being new definitely hurt the hype. Not to mention, the rough offseason made it a bit more difficult to seriously get into things. The East has lost a lot of its appeal. Chengdu are literally dead, and there's less fans and broadcast from various countries to support. Hopefully things will get better as we get towards the tournaments and contenders teams joining the East though. For now, I'll leave it at this. As someone who's been watching since Season 1, this didn't quite encapsulate that full experience that I'm accustomed to. It was still good, and I love some of the quality of life improvements and the efforts they put in, and I certainly enjoyed being able to co-stream again. I'm thankful to the league for that opportunity. But overall, Overwatch League 2023 opening week was just decent. Whether things start to go in a better or worse direction, time will tell. But for now, that's where we'll leave things. If you enjoyed this video and you want more Overwatch League content, make sure to give this video a big fat thumbs up and subscribe to this channel if you're new. And be sure to let me know what you thought of opening week down in the comments below and some of the things that you took notice of. And until next time, this is ATP, signing out. Peace.